Okay, so hello and thank you for coming to this presentation about Shuzo Fujimoto. I was looking for a new subject and I didn't want to repeat what I said at the online meeting for Fujimoto's centenary. So I thought I would make something more about the research on Fujimoto rather than Fujimoto himself. But of course, it also touches upon Fujimoto's works. Hard to avoid that. So I thought I would just talk how I first came, how I learned about Fujimoto, and then how I started doing this research and how it's going and what the future holds. Okay, so the first time I learned about Shuzo Fujimoto was in 2015, so that's exactly 10 years ago, when I went to my first origami convention, which was the outdoor origami meeting in Kraków, Poland. And there, among many new things in origami, I saw tessellations, and I thought it was an interesting thing. And Hydrangea, for like lots of advanced tessellations, she showed me how to follow the simple tessellation, which was a variant of the cloud folding by Fujimoto. And of course, on the displays, we had lots of variations of the Hydrangea and cloud folding and all those things that Fujimoto designed and variants thereof. So I became familiar with the name. And then I came home and I started folding some tessellations in order to learn this new kind of folding. And after a short while, I started making my own variations and designing new stuff. And I was very happy when I designed this tessellation, which I called Stars and Squares. And I published it on Flickr because that's where the origami community was at the time. And I had my own webpage already, but I started publishing in social media at that time. And it was very useful because people actually engage in discussions. And this way I learned that it's a nice model, but Fujimoto had designed the same thing at least 40 years before. So on one hand, I was a bit disappointed. On the other, I thought, okay, I'm in good company. And this has happened several times over, both to me and to others, that you design something, and it's nice, and then you learn, yeah, but Fujimoto did the same thing many years before. So again, the name appeared. And then in late 2015, Fujimoto died. So this again was some information that made rounds on the internet. And I also bought some books by Shuzo Fujimoto from Paula Helsing, who is here with us today. And this was important for several reasons. One was I had those books. And later on, it would turn out that they are very hard to come by because it were just small runs, and well, there are only a few copies that are sold out, and it's hard to get the physical book. And the other very important thing was that I got in touch with Sotoko Saito, who is a Japanese lady, who was the person shipping those books from Japan. So how I organized this, but books were shipped from Japan. And as it was later turned out, Sotoko Saito was not just a seller of books, but she had actually cooperated with Shuzo Fujimoto. She knew him personally, and she worked as an editor on some of his books. So this was a contact which would turn to be very useful later on. And I got those books, I had a look inside, and they landed on my shelf for quite a long time. And one of the reasons was that those books are very much not approachable. I will show you some examples. They document a lot of models, so that's a good thing. But it's not an origami book like you buy today, where you just have step-by-step instructions that you can follow for the model. It's more like a brain dump of what Fujimoto was working on. And many models, I would say the vast majority, require a lot of work, a lot of reverse engineering if you want to actually follow them. Sometimes even if you want to know if it's the same model as is shown in a different place, in a different book, or if it's the same or something else. So I had a look inside. I would say I was kind of scared and put them on my shelf, and I waited for the time. And here is another model which I designed and which I thought it's so good somebody must have already done it. So I ran some research, and I found that many people had designed the same thing. And among them, of course, Fujimoto seems to be the first. And I was able to learn about this thanks to Eric Yerde, who published information about this on Flickr. So he said that he read the book, he found a crease pattern, and again, folding from crease patterns is hard, so he wrote something about how he worked on this model, was able to fold it. And this is one of many places where I will have to say that I really enjoyed Flickr, because on this site, besides pictures, you have text. The text was searchable, and it still is. So when I designed something, I was able to search for, like, I thought, what keywords would I use to describe this model? And I ran some searches, and quite often I came up with models that others have followed. They're similar or the same, and I learned a lot of useful information this way. Unfortunately, on sites like Instagram, you don't have this search feature. You just have hashtags which are utterly useless for this kind of research. So it's like, thank you, Flickr. And even though few people use Flickr now for origami, I still have my account there, and I think it's a useful resource. And you still have all that old stuff. So we now have like a gap in the documentation, but about 10 years of origami research is very well documented in Flickr. You can still search it, you can still find it. There's probably still some gems in there that you can find if you look well. Yeah. And then sometime in 2021, I learned that Fujimoto was born in 1922. So next year will be the 100th anniversary of his birth. And I thought it's a good opportunity to learn more about him, because I always have this feeling that on one hand, everybody says, well, Fujimoto is a great origami creator, he's very influential. And then you go to conventions, you look online, and people fold maybe 5 or 10 models. So you have Hydrangea everywhere, that's nice. But if somebody is an influential creator, they should have created something more. And I was not able to learn those models, just don't see them. I tried to find some biographical information about him. And the best I could find was like 3 sentences, like he was a Japanese origami creator who worked on geometric origami, and he's great. That's it. So again, not very informative. I even tried to find the date of his birth, and I was only able to find the year, but not the day. So it seemed like a lot of information was missing. So I thought I would do some research and find out. So I set out to do this. And I knew that it would be a lot of work. You know, this kind of project is basically infinite, so I had to set some borders, because otherwise I would not be able to ever achieve what I planned. It was too much. So I thought one thing would be creating a list of models, and I decided to focus on the books only, because the books were 8, if I remember correctly. One is missing in the picture. This was taken before I had the last one. And you know, gathering models scattered across various journals, that would be a lot of work. It's upfront, I knew that you know, I had to set a narrow scope. You know, it would be still very ambitious. So I decided to buy the missing books, because I only have 5 at the top. So I set out to search, and I found out that some of them are really hard to get. And I'm pretty convinced that the book, which is not present here yet, was literally the last piece on the English-speaking internet that was available for sale. Maybe in Japanese you could find something more, but
yeah,
you know.
So that's the basically the layout of the book on bottom to the left, but then with the
hydrangeas, yes.
Yeah, the hydrangeas in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I finally got it, but it was very hard to find. It cost a fortune, but I thought, okay, I need this for my research. And the solid origami, the green book, it was also quite hard. I found one in the US. So those books are really hard to come by, because it's few copies, and people who are interested, they have them, and they don't sell them usually. So yeah. And then I wanted to find some people who knew Fujimoto and who could tell me information that was nowhere to be found. Besides Sadako Saito, I also had contact to Shuzo Fujimoto's son, Hitoshi, because at some point I gave workshops on Fujimoto's models at origami conventions, and I wanted to ask for permission. So through my niece, I acquired his email address, and we were in touch. And he sent me lots of very useful information. It's actually not obvious. Some people do research on disease origamis, and the family has other things to do, or they're busy and they don't have. In this case, I really got lots of information, lots of pictures, and there were actually many people. So I got pictures from Robert Lang from the time when he visited Fujimoto. And again, that's where I have pictures from, because before that, we didn't have any picture of Fujimoto's face. So it was just a name but without the picture of the person. And I got some information from Dave Brill and Tomoko Fusa. And later, many people sent some pieces of information. Once it became known that I was doing this research, sometimes people just approached me and said, okay, I have this, or I know something. And I'm publishing this information slowly, but there is still a lot of stuff that I just have somewhere on my drive, and I want to publish it, but it takes time. So one of my goals was writing a biography along with 3 sentences. So I looked for information from those people. Sometimes the information was inconsistent, so I had to find out what the final version was. And you can find this biography on the CFC site at this address. It's not very long, but I think it contains at least some basic information about Fujimoto's life, about his origami creation. I think it's good if somebody is said to be famous to learn something about him as a person, not only about his creations. Then the other thing was the list of models. And at this point, there's more than 400 entries, so much more than the 5 or 10 that were there previously. And it's certainly incomplete. It will probably never be, but it's at least a starting point. And I call this the catalog of Fujimoto's works. You can find a link on my website because it's a Google Sheet. And one of the important things is that each model is assigned a unique number. Because Fujimoto didn't give any names to many of his models, sometimes he published the same model under a different name in different books. So besides a few famous models, most models, you don't have a way to identify them. So you can't really talk about something that you can't name, right? So taking inspiration from catalogs of musical works, like we have Bachwerk Verzeichnis for Sebastian Bach's works, where each piece has a number. I did the same, and now we can say, okay, we're talking about star number 123, which is already a starting point. And then for each model, I have a picture of the model, a name if there is one, information about the books where the model was published, where you can find something about them, some other resources. Yeah, so it's already a starting point to see. And I was quite surprised by the breadth of his work. So of course, it has lots of geometrical origami. It's, I would say, more than 100 stars, various boxes, lots of tessellations. But one thing that is less well known is, for example, corrugations. He has several dozen corrugation designs, which are all very interesting, but I think they are very, very important. Most of them are in this solid origami book, which is, I think, the least known. At least less known than others. So I encourage you to, have a look and maybe find some interesting models. And of course, this work also involved trying to hold many of those models, far from all, but at least some. And sometimes it was necessary to at least understand the basic structure of the model in order to be able to tell, for example, is it the same model as something in another book or not. So for many models, there is a note saying that I have some pictures of the folding process. It's not diagrams of quality that I would publish, but if you write me, I can send you those ugly pictures, and it's better than nothing, or probably better than Fujimoto's raw notes, which are usually very hard to read. I also got Fujimoto's family to agree to put 5 of his books in the public domain, which means basically you can do anything with them. They are like outside copyright, and it means that you can distribute them freely, use them for any purpose, which I think is very good because the paper books are very hard to come by. And of course, without the raw books, people can do more research, they can follow those models. And now we can legally put those books online, and they're on archive.org, so you can view them in a nice browser. This is, I just scanned the physical books that I have. And this applies only to the 5 books that he published himself. The other 3 books were published by a publishing house, which means that the copyright is with the publishing house, and the publishing house no longer exists. And I was not able to learn who bought the rights, if anyone. So it's a kind of a stalemate, because theoretically you can do anything with this until 70 years from the author's death, which is a very long time. In practice, there is probably nobody who cares and who will come after you. So yeah, but at least for those 5 books, we have a fully legal way to access them. And then close to the day of Fujimoto's 100th birthday, we had a big online event, which I was able to organize with the help of Hydrangea in France. And we had presentations about Fujimoto. Hitoshi Fujimoto, his son, was there, and he also gave a talk about his father. We had workshops, so it was a way to celebrate the person. This is unique anniversary to talk about him and cherish his work. And a short time after this event, I was approached by Roberto Marassi, who was one of the founders of the CBO, the Italian Origami Society, who told me that he had some models that Fujimoto himself folded, because in the 1980s they exchanged letters. And he asked if I would accept those models and letters. At first, I insisted that it maybe would be better to have them at some kind of an institution or a private person. But he said he thought this would be a better way to promote Fujimoto and make sure that this is actually used and visible and made available to people. So then we had to organize transferring this precious package, because I didn't want to post it and then have it lost, because you can replace it. And so Robin Scholz was our courier, because that year he was attending the Italian Origami Convention and then the German Convention next year. So at the Italian Convention he picked up the box, and then at the German Convention where I was also going, he gave it to me. And the collection is really wonderful. It contains several dozen small models that Fujimoto folded and sent to Roberto Marassi. But besides that, there are also drawings and letters, which I think also contain interesting information. Unfortunately, I haven't had the time yet to fully analyze this, but I have digitized those papers, and slowly I'm trying to extract some information from that. And I have one of those models with me today, so you can have a look. I got special museum quality envelopes to store them, so you can have a look. Just be careful, because it's a very unique piece of folding.
When you looked at the models that we sent to Roberto Marassi, can you recognize them from what you have seen in
some? Those models are a very interesting resource, because on one hand, I can find some models that I knew from the books or some other place, but some were new, some were different variations, and they also show some things about, let's say, Fujimoto's way of thinking about origami, or ways of doing origami. For example, in this pink tessellation here, which, by the way, the molecule is the stars and squares, where it all started. You see that he made a tessellation with 2 different kinds of molecules. So I think this shows that he was really creative. So he was a pioneer. So for him, even coming up with the idea of using a triangle grid or holding something which is flat and abstract, I think this would be enough to put him among influential origami creators. But it seems that he really wanted to do something more. And in his books, you can find some pictures where he has a really complex compositions, where he uses different molecules, where it's not just a single pattern that repeats over and over. But seeing this in real life, I think it kind of highlights it even more. That he didn't just want to make a pattern, he wanted to make something more of it. You can also see some variations. So again, you see that it's not that he just made the design and followed strictly. He played with it, and I see this in my own work, and I think most origami creators have this, that what you publish or show to people is just a tiny fraction of all the work that you do. So having some random models from him is like a snapshot. Again, it's just a tiny fraction, but still it shows more than you can find in published material. So in some cases, you see a model and you see that you can modify this and that, and you can speculate that Fujimoto also thought about it. But if you get a model which really shows it, you have definite proof. Without it, it's just speculation, even if it's likely and based on, it's not completely grounded, but it remains just speculation. So anyway, those resources I think are very, very great. And I wanted to talk a little bit about working with those resources, because it's a different thing when you read about someone in the biography and different when you are writing the biography and you just have raw materials and you have to make something with it. So first of all, those books, I mentioned that they are not very approachable. And here are some examples. So on the left, you have a page from Twist Origami 1. And this is what you know about most stars. So for most stars, you just have information about the starting twist and a picture of the finished model. And the picture is just hand-drawn without showing the layers. So sometimes it's hard because sometimes you have stars which look the same, but the layers are different, right? So it's a different design, but you don't see it from those pictures. So that's one of the reasons why I needed to fold many of those things, because just looking at the pictures didn't even reveal what the final. It is a picture of the finished model, but it's quite incomplete. And then you have another level, which is just models will just have a picture. So the star on the left, the big one on the cover, is not mentioned anywhere. It's just a picture which appears on the cover. That's all. It's a variation of another design. But actually, I didn't look. I read through the book, but you don't look at the cover. You think it doesn't bring anything new. And actually, it contained a model which didn't appear anywhere else. And then there is yet another level where you don't even have a picture of the model. You just have a mention. So as you probably did not notice, somewhere here you have information about 10 various models where you don't have a picture. You just have a note which says something like, you can fold star number 3 like star number 9. Okay, so that's all we know. And restoring the model from that is even more difficult. So I worked primarily with automated translation because I don't speak Japanese. For some models, it was helpful to some degree. So sometimes the text was gibberish, sometimes it was not very good English, but well, it did help me at least a little. But for some, thank you. But for some designs, those translations were completely useless. So in this case, I asked online, and with the help of some origami friends, I got translations from native speakers. The problem is, sometimes native speakers told me, I understand the words, but I have no idea what this means. Fujimoto worked at the time where the origami vocabulary was not standardized, so he used his own words to describe what he was doing. And I'm told that but sometimes it's like, even if you're an origami person who speaks Japanese, you read the text, you understand the words, but you don't know what this means in practice. So in that case, you have to dig deeper. Again, sometimes it was just me sitting and experimenting and thinking, okay, what could this sentence mean? How do I combine star and 5 and 7? In some cases, I cooperated with other people to exchange ideas. And based on this paragraph, I was able to reproduce several designs. But that's a single paragraph. There's much more running text in those books, most of which I just had to ignore. Okay, so this is an example of a translation from a Japanese native speaker. And yeah, so some of those are helpful to some degree, some are completely unintelligible. So some of those things are probably some kind of metaphors, like maybe you would use some words like saying, okay, now collapse this or something, and he just described it in his own way. And so here's an example of one which was relatively easy. So the star described as number 9 is on the left. Of course, in different books, it's a different number. So it's star number 9 in Twist Origami 1, in Twist Origami 2, if it appears, it's usually a different number. Sometimes the same, sometimes different. Okay, and based on this description, I came up with a design which was almost right. And I know it was almost right because, fortunately, I found this model among the models from Roberto Moras. And the only difference was that I thought that when you narrow down those petals, you make mountain folds. And in Fujimoto's model, it was valleys. Well, apart from that, it was right. So on the left is the model by Fujimoto, on the right is my recreation. And it's probably the first time somebody folded this model in many, many years. Maybe the first time since Fujimoto folded it, I don't know. Now, another thing you may have noticed about this model and about the model that you just saw in real life is how terrible Fujimoto's folding is, right? It's so messy. I mean, most people who fold this for the first time in a workshop will make a much better fold. And I think, again, this is something you won't find in published books, but I think it says something about Fujimoto's approach. So I believe it says that he cared about the design as a kind of abstract thing, like an idea, something mathematical. And then folding this in actual paper was, like just a rendering, like a sketch to show that, yes, you can actually do it from paper. But he didn't care about precision. He didn't choose fancy papers. When you look
like prototyping.
Well, I don't know, but this model, a model he sent to somebody on a different continent, right? So I think it's just the way he folded. Again, it's just my theory, but I think that's just his way of folding. And you can see, for example, when he has models based on a hexagon like this one, quite often he didn't even cut off the edges. So he just constructed a hexagon from a square, folded the paper behind, so he had more layers, and it becomes even more messy, and the hexagon is not very precise to start with, and then it's messy folding, and it looks like this. So anyway, it's very interesting because, for example, for me, the folded form also matters. I like different papers. I like the model to look nice. For Fujimoto, it was not. It seems it was not completely not important at all. Which again, it was a very interesting discovery for me, but it seems that's just how things are. And at least one of the models is pulled from just a page from some horror magazine. And I think in one of the stories I got from people who met Fujimoto, they also said that he just folded from paper he found around their house and he didn't care. And here are some more designs recreated from that cryptic paragraph. The 5 models on the left is actually a kind of a progression. So the star in the top left corner is a model you can find in the books. The one at the bottom is also a model you can find in the books. And the sentence in the paragraph describes that you can mix those stars. And this one was really hard. So I spent a lot of time with this and with hints from some people and discussing and thinking, does this make sense? And finally we came up with a design which I think meets the criteria described there. And it's like a smooth progression from one design to the other. So we start with the windmill with a sharp spike rays. Then at the tip, you start with having a very small element which moves down and becomes bigger and bigger. And at some point, it becomes so big that it's the only part of the ray, and that's the star at the bottom. So it's like if you had a slider from 0 to 100%, and you can mix those two models at any range. So I think it's very interesting. And I'm pretty sure this is what Fujimoto had in mind, but it really took a lot of time to reverse engineer this from one cryptic sentence. Then there's tessellations, and the quality of print differs a lot between books. So pictures on the right are from invitation to creative play with origami. They are black and white, but at least you have some kind of grayscale, so you can see something. With problems, but you can see something. But the pictures in Twist Origami 1 on the left is just plain black and white, and it's very hard to read anything from those pictures. So the tessellation in the top left corner, that's my 1,000 squares, so that's something I can recognize easily, and I know its structure. But some others are difficult to read, and those are pictures in backlight. So it's on the top surface, you see through. So again, it shows some layers which are inside, which makes it even more difficult to decipher because you have more elements. And if you have something like this, which just looks like a pattern of triangles, you can achieve the same kind of structure in many different ways. So I had to look for clues in the text in the book, in some other books, to find out, okay, which variant of, which way of, like, is it just a triangle twist tessellation or something else? So again, it took a lot of work. There were some cases where I'm pretty sure I was confused, so then I fixed what I. So again, quite difficult. I have folded many of those designs, but not all. And again, for some of those designs, I could find a model in the collection from Roberto Morassi. And this way, I also found out that another of my early designs, which I was very proud of, was also Fujimoto's. So this is propellers tessellation. And at first, I missed it in the books because, again, it's not listed as a separate model. It's a part of this complex design, which uses a whole composition of different molecules. And yes, if you look closely, you notice this molecule somewhere there. But I missed it at first. But then when I saw this folded into the most smaller, so I said, okay, if you fold it and view it, I had a look through the books and I noticed, yes, it is somewhere there. So again, it's quite tricky and it's like solving a crime mystery, you know. Lots of fun, but also quite, quite tough. Then there is a huge area that I have hardly even looked at. One is Fujimoto's mathematical constructions. He made many constructions for various angles, dividing the sheet into various proportions and so on and so on. And again, it has some pictures, but it's running text in Japanese. Again, with automated translation, sometimes you understand what it's about, sometimes not. Sometimes you have 2 pages of text, and I'm not even sure if it's all part of one construction or several different things. It would be great to explore this. I think it's also important because some things, such as, for example, the iterative method of dividing the side into thirds or fifths, that's one of Fujimoto's inventions, and we use it and don't even know about. I would do it for Fujimoto. So I think we could find many interesting things in there. But, you know, it requires, again, more work, so I didn't have the time. If there is somebody who knows mathematics and wants to dig in, I think we can find lots of interesting stuff there. And the other thing is running text, because besides models, those books have running text like this. I just had a very quick look. Some of it is about models, some is general things about mathematics. Again, I wanted to focus because, you know, I can do everything. It would be interesting to read this and see what we can find in that. And as I also got additional resources from people who learn about this Fujimoto project and wanted to help. So I got things such as pictures of models for by Fujimoto that I did not have. Again, the picture on the left from Satoko Saito, it helped me solve the mystery of one of the tessellations. So I was not sure how to interpret the pictures, but seeing that he had folded this, I could match it with the pictures and it started making sense. 2 nice ladies from Japan sent me a book, which is not all by Fujimoto, but which contains a chapter by Fujimoto. Again, I have practically not analyzed the things in there. Some of them are repeated from other books, but some seem to be new. And the book with the dinosaur on the cover, that's the Noah magazine, where Fujimoto first published his Hydrangea. because the Hydrangea, which is probably the most famous model of his, one of the books, I think it mentions a Hydrangea variant, but the Hydrangea as we know it, the main thing, it was published in 1994, I think, in this magazine. So now I also have it again. It's a great source of information, which I would love to analyze when time allows. And I had also pictures from other people, information about some models that I wanted to identify, which were not on my list, and so on and so on. Even the books that I have, they were reprinted many times. So even if you say twist origami one, it's not always exactly the same thing. Some of those books are basically photocopies connected with staples. Some look more like an actual book. And some people sent me like, so there was this edition, this edition, this edition. So it's also quite interesting. So as a summary, some things that I came to think about Fujimoto based on this research. One is this focus on the design rather than on the execution. Again, here's an example of a model from the collection. It's a star which was not in any book. It's a simple modification, but still, I didn't find it in any book. Maybe it's mentioned in some sentence, like you can change the race. I don't know, maybe it's there, but I didn't see it. Below is my rendition, which is a bit cleaner. In this model, you can see that it's folded from a hexagon, which is not cut out, but only folded behind. That's why you have some coloration on the back, which normally would be completely clean. You see how far this is from a regular hexagon, and so on and so on. It's a very interesting thing to learn. Then there are lots of my speculations. For example, many of Fujimoto's stars are actually tessellation molecules, with the remaining paper folded into layers. But only for a few, you can actually find the tessellation in a book. Again, so I expect that if I see it, he was able to see it as well, and that he was aware that many of those models were tessellations. But I don't have definite proof. If I don't have a folded model, I don't have a page from a book which shows it. I can only guess. So I folded a number of those tessellations. Some of those are also on the display outside. And some are really nice patterns. Similarly, I noticed that you can change some of those stars into fractals. For one star, the lucky star fractal I showed you a moment before, we have proof in Fujimoto's book because there's this pattern. But for others, we don't have it. So again, it's my guess that if I can see it, then probably you could see it as well, but no definite proof. And they also make some nice designs. Some of those have also been independently developed by others. So like the two stars at the top, I've seen this done by multiple people. Then something which is not really a speculation, but speculation is how far Fujimoto went with it, is that the stars form a system. So there are some stars which are unique, but many of them fit into a set of rules. So you take a tessellation molecule, then you modify the edges to form the race, and you have like 10 internal molecules, 10 ways to modify the edges, which gives you 100 combinations, and you have 100 stars. Sometimes you can see it because, like here, you have this model which is called handle, like the handle of an old school tab. Well, this model labeled 50 here is like the base version with a simple windmill in the center. And he just says that the windmill is the star number 1 in this book, and then number 51 is with star number 2, and so on and so on. So you clearly see that he sees that. Yes, you can change the center while the arrays remain the same. But he is not consistent. So for some models, he includes pictures of the various variants, sometimes on one, sometimes maybe it's mentioned in the text, but I didn't notice it because the numbers were not spread out so clearly. This also gave me some issues how I should build the catalog, because I wanted to give a number to each unique model, and then you come to the philosophical discussion what makes a unique origami model. This is a big topic. I've written about it on my blog. will be too long, so let's not get into it, but it's absolutely not clear what a single model is. So I took the approach that if a model appears explicitly in the book, it gets a separate number. And if I know that Fujimoto knew that it was a technique that you can apply in different ways, then the technique gets a different number. So you already have some duplication because you can say this is model number so and so, or this technique is a different number applied to the windmill stuff, for example. Sometimes, again, I can only guess if he was aware that that's a general technique or not. I would love this to be perfectly consistent, but I don't know if that's achievable at all. And thinking about Fujimoto's influence on origami, I think besides creating some really great models like the Hydrangea, I think much of his influence lies in his techniques, like the idea of folding with hex grids and basically everything that follows. If you do geometric origami and you have read in Fujimoto's work, you really can't escape the feeling that whatever you do, it somehow relates to Fujimoto's work. It's all based, standing on the shoulders of giants and so on. He was also very versatile. I mentioned those corrugations. He had a few figurative models, just a few, but I think the apple is very nice. You see that he tried to arrange his models in different ways. He tried variations, those tessellations with different molecules, those big layouts with complex changes. On the left is a picture that shows a tessellation which is folded from a hexagon with a fold cut out. So again, something, experimenting with something non-standard. Often when you think about geometric origami, you think it's just a pattern repeating over and over, and that's not the case if you want. Yeah, so I've done a lot of research, but there's still lots to be done, both in the books, but a lot could be taken out of those models from Roberto Moras' collection. There are models which I still haven't assigned CFW numbers to, although I haven't identified them as a variant of something else. There are notes in the letters. It will be interesting to read all and draw conclusions about what's why. Yeah, so that's also an invitation for you or anyone else if you have a bit of time. So there are some things that you can do without spending much time. So first of all, talk about Fujimoto, quote his model, show them to others, spread awareness. And I encourage you to also use those CFW numbers because it's a unique identifier which allows us to talk about a model even if it doesn't have a name. But if you have more time and would like to help, I would be very glad to give you access to those things, like things I got from Shuzo Fujimoto, the letters, the folded models, the mathematical constructions. It's still a lot of work waiting to be done. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Okay, more models surviving with his family left models that he folds.
Okay, so for the recording, I will repeat the question. Are there any more models surviving? And does his family, for example, have any more models? I don't know. I know that he exchanged letters with some folders. So maybe they have. I know that David Beer has letters and books and models as well. I'm not sure how many, but I think quite a few, because he was one of the main contact points in Europe for Fujimoto. So there are probably models spread out somewhere. I'm not aware of them. If somebody knows and you can just tell me that yes, somebody else has models, it will be good to know. I will try to add this to the knowledge base. Yeah.
Maybe I missed the beginning, but what was the timeline of Akira Yoshikawa and Fujimoto? Because Akira Yoshikawa came up with the timeline in new generation so yeah, was it already there?
Okay, so the question is how does the timeline of Fujimoto connect with the timeline of Akira Yoshizawa? So Fujimoto started his origami work later because Yoshizawa was active right after World War II. I think those famous models of his were something like 1947. And Fujimoto, he became active in the late 1960s. I think the construction of the 60-degree angle, which he considered like the starting point of many things, headsprings and so on. I think that's 1967. The books, Solid Origami was published in 1976, and then the Twist Origami series with that was 1980s. And the books from the F project, those colorful ones with the publishing house, that was I think the 1990s. Maybe even later. So maybe the 2000s. Yeah. Anyway, so Fujimoto was certainly later than Yoshizawa. I don't know to what degree he was aware of his work, and for example, if he was aware of the the diagramming system that we use today that Yoshizawa had invented. So I don't know honestly. I have a list of names of people who I know that came to visit Fujimoto, who exchanged letters. Yoshizawa, I think, is not on the list. I don't know.
Do we know whether he was a member of, say, the JOAS or the NOAA association?
Okay, the question is if we know if he was a member of some Japanese origami society. I don't know. I know that he met some Japanese folders. He traveled to the Italian convention in 1988. And there was a big delegation of Japanese folders from that time. But I don't know about his membership in M societies. That's a good question to research, by the way.
Yeah, because then, there might be contacts there. People can.
Good point, but I don't know. Okay, so thank you very much. I will stop the recording now.